Kids Playground.
Hooray!
This is the Deron Harris Podcast. Here's your host, Deron Harris.
Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to the Deron Harris program, podcast or show, whatever you want to call it. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. Thank you for making it back. Hopefully you had a good week. I had a pretty decent week. I traveled and went to South Florida to pick up some things out of a storage unit that I had, but made it home safely. Had a few things wrong with the coach that we're going to get fixed, but all minor things. Traveling is great. I absolutely love it. I love traveling in my coach with my wife. We have a great time. We talk a lot. We don't listen to a whole bunch of music, but we do enjoy each other's company. So in that, if you have the means or if you have an RV or something like that, folks, I highly recommend it. So how was your week? Hopefully your week was really good. Like I said, my week was good. My week was also good mentally. I had a really good mental health week. I spoke with my therapist last week, and that was good, and it's moving positively towards maybe soon me being discharged from therapy, but still having access to therapy if I were to ever need it again. But according to my therapist, I am making great progress and should be proud of the progress that I have made, so much so that she is considering discharge. So I'm very proud and really happy with that. That doesn't mean that I won't have to continue to take the medication. I still have to see my psychiatrist every few months just to kind of touch base and refill prescriptions, of course. But for the meantime, or until then, I will be trying to navigate through life myself without any crutches, so to speak. So what am I talking about today? Today, I am talking about something that I am very familiar with because it was actually my profession before I stopped and retired, and actually, I guess retired would be a good word. I'm not really doing it anymore. So I was in the service industry for a long time. I was a restaurant manager for a long time, but before that, I was a bartender, a server. I've done coat check. I've done anything in the service and hospitality industry that you can think of. I've worked at hotels, I've worked at places with dirt floors and places with marble floors and every place in between. And one thing that always comes up every day, really, pretty much in this business, and that is the business of tips. If you should tip, if you shouldn't tip, who tips, who doesn't tip, the age groups, the demographics, who is it? Who isn't it? Who tips and who does not tip? Today I'm talking about tipping. And just so you know, tipping is not a city in China. Just so you know. Tipping is the act of providing monetary compensation to a hospitality professional who has provided a service to you. And in this country, it is not mandatory that you tip. You don't have to tip, although there are some places that will add a gratuity onto a check for particular reasons. Maybe there was a party of 6 or more, or there was a holiday party where there was a fee collected for a room rental that was divvied up between the people who actually worked the party. And yeah. So what about tipping? What does tips, what does it mean? Because it's actually an acronym. Tips. The word tips, TIPS. The word tips is an acronym that stands for to ensure proper service. And that's what it is, to ensure proper service. Now, is it mandatory to tip to receive proper service? No, it shouldn't be anyway. In my profession and in my experience, it was, for me, has never really, I guess when I first started it was, because it was exciting that I got to leave my job with money every day. That was great. But after a while, it turned from that more towards the actual serving of people, to making people happy. You know, serving people after a long day, I just found pleasure in it. I found good pleasure in providing, hospitality to people. I'm a very hospitable person. I like to see people smile and laugh and have a good time. And especially if I'm on the job, then that's my whole shift. I'm trying to make it my whole shift. I'm trying to have a good time my whole shift. But sometimes you can have a really bad day in this business. I mean, it can creep up on you at any given moment, but you still have to maintain your demeanor in order to receive a decent tip. Now, what is a decent tip? Well, in this country, most places will say 20%. That's the norm. But there are places that'll, that do 15%. There are actually places that do more than 20%, 22%, 23, 24, 25%, depending on where you are. Some people will tip you more than they should tip you on a check. Some people won't tip you at all. That's called getting stiffed. Now, I've been stiffed a whole bunch of my life. And I tell people all the time, especially working in nightclubs where you're not really dealing with food, where you're just dealing with alcohol. It's funny because people will spend, take this example. People will spend $100 on food. They'll sit down with some people and spend $100 on food. 20% of $100 is $20, right? So they'll spend $100 on food. If the people are nice or, they tip accordingly, they're going to leave $20. It's not that necessarily always true for bartenders. If I'm a bartender in a place and I serve $100 worth of drinks, a lot of times people aren't going to tip me that $20. They're just going to tip me $4 or $5, $6 or $7, maybe the change that they gave me. They're giving me. I gave them back, but they're not going to tip me 20% because they're not. I don't think they really don't think to. But bartenders end up making their money in tips based on sheer volume. You get me? A lot of restaurant bartenders will be tipped accordingly because they deal with food, but there are a lot of places that deal specifically with just alcohol where they won't receive that full 20%. Now, there are some instances where they will receive the full 20% and then some. There are certain reasons or certain what's the word I'm looking for? There's certain reasons you charge people a gratuity, like in a nightclub. Say if you went to a nightclub. Now, this is absolutely, I've always thought this was ridiculous, even being in the nightclub business. Say you go to a nightclub and you want to buy a bottle of alcohol. You bought a bottle of Grey Goose. It was $350, right? Now, that's $350. Now, to ensure proper service, you're supposed to tip 20%. What's 20% of $350? 30. It's like $70 or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like $70 that you get tipped on that bottle, if that's it. So what happens in nightclubs is there's an automatic gratuity put on these bottles. So for the cocktail waitress, who has to fight her way through the crowd and serve and get ice and clean up vomit and reset her section and so on and so forth. And these people are going to be in her section as long as it takes them to drink that bottle. So in that, her space is taken, so she should be compensated for that. Now, a lot of people think that the venue should compensate for that. And to a degree, I believe that. I think sometimes that should be the case, especially where you don't make that, the money that you should. Now, I've worked at places in New York where they had what's called a guarantee, which basically means if I went to work today and I'm a waiter at this place and I make less than $100, they will guarantee me, or they will make up the difference until I reach that $100. It's called a guarantee. Now I worked for that place for a while. Actually, it was really cool because on the days like it would be a rainy day, we'd have a completely shit day, and still at very least we walked out with $100. So at very least, at this job, at the absolute least you were going to make per week was $500 in the week. Now, I've known service industry people who've worked in the service industry who can't make their rent because their job sucks. I've worked in places like that. I've been in that situation myself where I can barely make my rent because I went to work at Bennigan's or Chili's today for lunch and I only made $35. And that's how much money I make every day at Chili's or a Bennigan's because I'm not being tipped accordingly. Or the ticket items don't ring up enough for me to recoup that much money even if people do tip me 20%. Like Applebee's will have 2 for $20. 2 for $20. Where it's two people that come in, they eat 3 courses for $20. What are you tipping on $20? Like $4? You know what I'm saying? So the server has to turn the table in order to make the money. You know what I'm saying? So if the server is unable to turn their tables, then they don't make as money as they should because the minimum wage, I forgot what it was, but I think it was like 8 and change when I left. But the national minimum wage is like, well, the service industry minimum wage is always lower than the national minimum wage, and that is because they are tipped employees. And there are a lot of countries who don't work like that. Like England, a lot of countries, like the majority of countries, actually, you go to England and get a drink, they don't tip you. That's why people from England, when they come here, they don't tip us. But we think they're being rude, but it's just it's not part of their customs and they don't understand. So a lot of people, when they come over, they have to be schooled on how to go eat out at an American restaurant because here in America, we work for tips. Now, I've worked at places also that have done shady shit to people who earn tips. Like I've worked at a place where they'll book this room, right? They've booked this room for a private event. There's a wedding or something. They booked this entire room for this private event. There are 5 of us working. Okay, there'll be 5 bartenders working, but they rented this room for $50,000 plus a 20% gratuity, which is in the contract. But the people who work the party, rarely do they see more than $200. 20% of $50,000 is a lot of money. But that money doesn't get divvied up the way that it should. It really doesn't. Everybody that's supposed to get their $200 gets their $200, but anything after that, a lot of times the venue pockets, which is unfair to the workers. Because if you're going to charge that gratuity, if that's what you're going to call it, then you should pay it. And if you don't pay it, that's just shitty on your part. And if you work for a person or work for people who do this, report them. I'm a huge advocate in reporting people who do people wrong in the service industry because it happens all the time. There are owners in this business who will take advantage. They'll make money and get rich. They ride around in their Ferraris and Lamborghinis and they drive around on their boats and yachts and shit all over their employees in the meantime. So I wholeheartedly encourage everyone, if there is any kind of wage disparagement, please contact the Wage and Hour Board and report these people. But for the most part, if you're being tipped, and you have a wage, then that's pretty much what your salary is going to be. So it really comes down to you. And what I always tried to internalize it like this: I am a private contractor, right? I work for tips. Now, I'm provided by the establishment that I work for all the materials that I need and all the product that I need to carry on my own business. Now, my money, the amount of money that I make is in direct proportion to how hard I'm willing to hustle. And also how I provide the service that I provide. It is in direct proportion to how much I care about the service. I mean, it doesn't work all the time because I know some people have given stellar, outstanding service and gotten stiffed. But more times than not, the better the service you provide, the better tip you make. It's just the facts. It takes a while to hone your craft. I've been doing this for 30 some odd years, or, I did it for some 30 some odd years, but it took a while to get to the point where you were comfortable enough to know how to get money, to get your tips from people. There are different tricks that you can try. So many things that you can do as a tipped employee to earn a better tip. A lot of it is service driven. The first thing that you can do, there's one thing that you can do that will almost automatically, and well, it did in my case, almost automatically ensured that I made better tips every day. Every day. Almost ensured that I made better tips. As a matter of fact, for me, it worked every time. It worked absolutely every single time. And that is to not care about getting tipped. I don't care if you tip me or not. Okay? Care more about the needs of your guests. Simple as that. It's called hospitality. People come here to be waited on. We chose this job. Some of us give shitty attitudes to people. We really do. We'll give the shittiest attitude, and we're the ones who signed up for it. And then we'll give them shitty attitude and expect them to give us their money. So sometimes I can kind of see why people don't or won't tip because of the quality of service. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is the quality of service. Because people will tip for good service. Now, what they leave is a whole different ballpark. Now, some people know. I mean, I've had this happen also. It's happened to me, and I've watched it happen to other people and how they react to it. Now, it'll be a scenario like an older couple will come in and they'll sit down, they'll have a great meal, they'll talk with the server, they'll have a great time, they'll laugh, and when it comes to pay, they'll leave you on $100, they'll leave you maybe $5, $6 or $7. They'll get up and leave. And they think that they've tipped you adequately and accordingly. And in a previous day, they would be right. But in this day, we want 20%. So if someone leaves us $5 on a $100 bill, we're going to be upset about it. It doesn't matter if they're young, old, black, white, whoever it is. If they leave us $5 on 100, we're going to be upset about it. But if you think about it like this, not only will you have a more pleasant shift, but you'll make more money because you'll be in a better mood anyway. And that is infectious. It's contagious. Think about it like this. Those old folks, they came out here tonight to enjoy themselves. They probably don't go out very often. They're very frugal. They're older folks, as older folks tend to be. They're nice. They're humble. They may not have a bunch of money. You see, the thing is, in this business, is not to judge anyone for their lack of ability to tip you what you think that you deserve to be tipped. You don't take that out on people. That's something that you swallow. Or maybe you go in the walk-in for a couple of minutes and you scream, holler, and you curse the people out. But you come out on the floor ready to work. And the way you combat those feelings, and this is the way that I did it, I went into work expecting never to be tipped. Never to be tipped. Do you follow me? I went to work, and you can, oh, you're lying. No, I'm not. I went to work expecting not to be tipped, especially at some places that I've worked at. I expect these motherfuckers not to tip me. I worked at a place called the Spy Bar. For lack of, better phrase, or it was an all black club. Now, historically, we know black people generally don't tip. And if they do, they rarely tip 20% unless they're in this business. And the reason why is because a lot of times people are just uneducated about it. Now, a lot of times they don't have it either, but they do want to go out and enjoy some stuff. Now, people say, oh, if you don't have the money, you shouldn't go out. Well, a lot of people don't have the money, but that shouldn't negate that shouldn't disqualify them from going out and trying to have a good time, because you never know. They might stumble upon something that might bring them joy and happiness in their life. Maybe they loved our food so much, but they didn't have the money today. Maybe they came back another time. Maybe they hated it. You never know. But you move on. You provide good service, and eventually will come to you. But when people start getting, oh man, this is bullshit, I hate this job, so and so, I've been right there. I mean, I used to work, and this is, I mean, to put some things into perspective for you, I was a bartender in New York City for a long time. I worked at a place that I loved, absolutely loved, called the Kennel Room. And I've worked at a lot of nightclubs, and to kind of shorten the story, in New York, as a bartender in a nightclub, you make pretty decent money. I mean, there were times that I remember making over $1,000 in the shift, right? Over $1,000 in the shift. But I also remember a couple of times walking out of my job with $700 in my pocket going, this place sucks. I'm never coming back here. The fuck do you call this? This is bullshit. With $700 in my pocket. I'm going home with $728 in my pocket, and this place is bullshit. Now, why would I say that? Why would I say this is bullshit after walking out with $728 in my pocket? And the answer to that is simple. Sometimes you are not tipped for the work that you do. Sometimes you work 10 times harder than you have to for very little reward, depending on where you work. Now, am I coming down on black people? Maybe a little bit. Why? Because it's really kind of a fact. It's a well-known fact that a lot of black folks just don't tip. They don't tip accordingly. They just don't. They tip you a little bit, and it's better now. It's better now, but it used to be bad. I mean, I can't tell you how many bars I've stood behind and how many people I've served and just got stiffed. And after a while, like I said, I just started expecting not to be tipped. And what was I going to do then? I'm still going to provide good service. I'm not going to be angry about it. I'm not going to give people attitude about it. I'm going to work harder on my craft. I'm going to try harder to give better service. I'm going to do the best that I can. Every single cocktail, every single plate of food, every single guest. I'm going to try as hard as I can for every single person. And when I just started doing that, I started getting tips from other people's tables because they saw how seriously that I took my job. They saw how passionate I was about serving people, about making them happy. I use a lot of things, a lot of my talents to further myself in that business, in the hospitality business. I used stand-up comedy to break the ice a lot. And I also used the hospitality in my tables to practice my stand-up comedy. I kind of got a captive audience. I got a whole section full of people. If I got something prepared, or if I had something prepared, I would go in and say a couple of jokes. And that would always make me extra cash. I learned how to do my job better. I learned how to make better cocktails. I learned how to make better food. And that increased the money that I made. And in New York, it was at one time for 12 years, about 11 or 12 years, I worked for 3 days a week as a bartender in New York City. I was able to make all my bills, and I only worked 3 days a week because I was tipped appropriately, or I provided much better service in order to command those tips. Also, where you choose to work will greatly impact the types of tips that you make. Because if you work in a place with dirt floors, you're probably not going to make as much money as the person with the place with marble floors, for the simple fact that the ticket items aren't as high. Now, you might make it if the volume is higher. But if you got two places with roughly the same volume, one is higher and has higher ticket amounts than the other, you're going to make more money at the higher ticket amount place, just the way that it is. You might make a little bit more money every now and then at the other place, but it's not sustainable. So, what do? You find a place, that you like, that you believe in, that you are excited about. And trust me, this is all very important when it comes to making money and when it comes to getting tips. It's all extremely important. Where you work is extra. I'll take anything. You can't be like that because you'll end up miserable. Be selective. I was always selective. I always treated it like these certain places didn't exist for me. That's how I look for apartments too, but that's how I do pretty much anything. If I want something specific, I treat everything else like it doesn't exist. So if I want to work at Seasons 52, TGI Fridays doesn't exist to me. It's just the way that my brain works. And behind that, I've been rewarded. I've searched out places to actually work. I've got to work with 3 celebrity chefs that currently work on Food Network. 2 of them work on Food Network now. They're good friends of mine. And I've had the pleasure of serving high-profile individuals, like a lot of major celebrities. I've worked my way into that. I've worked my way into that in the years that I've been in this business. In the 35 years or so that I've been in this business, I've worked my way into that niche. And for that, I only work at places, A, that are going to provide me a whole lot of volume. Or I work at places that are extremely elegant. But I will not work at places that are going to put me in harm's way physically. And that's first and foremost. I will not do that. I will not. I don't care how good the money is. I don't care what people are talking about. A couple of dollars is not worth gunshot wounds, stab wounds, being beat up, none of that. I've been robbed behind the bar twice. So I'm not a fan. So any of that type of stuff, any of those type of venues, I'm not remotely interested in. Instead, what I do is I go after the venues that fit my lifestyle. That I look at the clientele, and before I apply for these jobs, I go there. I sit down, I eat, I talk to the people, I try and figure out if they like it. And that's how I look for jobs too. Also, sometimes I've talked to people, hey man, this place is great. Yeah, well, this job is bullshit. Really? Okay. But on the other foot, I've worked at places where this place is a hole in the wall, but these people love their employees, and this dude has been working here for 25 years. Simple as that. I worked at a place on the beach in St. Petersburg, and that's exactly what it was. It was one of those things. It was ran down. It really needed some help, like aesthetically. You could see, it smelled like beer rot, but it was packed every night, and everybody that worked there, at least at the main bar, had worked there for better than 20 years because they made money, because they're still making money on a regular basis, on a nightly basis, at an extremely busy place on the beach. So it really is important at the places that you choose to work when you're looking at where or how much money you're going to get tipped. I rarely go to corporate restaurants unless they're high-end corporate restaurants like a Fleming's or a Ruth Chris or a Capitol Grill or something in that nature. If you're going to look around in places like that, you have a high probability of making better tips, but you have to have almost an absorbent amount of knowledge to work at these places. They want you to have a lot of product knowledge. Some places will train you, but a lot of places want you already trained. They want you to already have the knowledge in order to have you work for their guests. A lot of places like but Capitol Grill, they won't hire a lot of people from Chili's. They just won't do it because it's not the same type of work. But like a Fleming's, an employee from a Fleming's might get hired at a Capitol Grill because they are in the same genre. They're in that same vein of hospitality, that same higher class vein of hospitality. Now, that's not to say that I can't work at both, because like I said, I've worked at both. I've worked at places with marble floors, places with dirt floors, and everywhere in between. And I've thrived at all of these type places because of the tricks of the trade. Now, there are a lot of tricks of the trade. Now, there's some things that you can do to help yourself acquire more money behind the bar or as a server. But I'll tell you about all that stuff when I come back from break. I'm going to take a quick, fast break, go see what my wife is up to. I made some French toast for her this morning on some hospitality. Made some French toast, so I'm going to see how she's getting along with that, if I need to make anything else. And I'll be back. You're listening to the Deron Harris Podcast.
For the ones finding new ways to ensure the job always gets done. For the ones wearing many hats. For the ones who are hands-on, even from far away. And the ones keeping business moving forward. We are Grainger, offering professional-grade industrial supplies, plus real-time product availability and access to experts ready to answer your toughest questions. Call, clickgrainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Now, back to the Deron Harris Podcast.
Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to the program. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for hanging on. Thanks for waiting around. Today I'm talking about tipping and the hospitality business. It was my business for a long time, but now I am done with that business. I've decided to give it up in my efforts to pursue something different. And so far, so good. So this podcast is really for a lot of the people who are still in this business, who are curious about this subject, why people tip, why they don't tip, what can they do to increase their tips, et cetera, et cetera. Before I went to the break, I was talking about certain tricks of the trade to help you increase your tips. And I've learned these things. A lot of them pertain to bartenders. Some of this stuff can be done by servers as well. But I have learned over the course of many, many years certain things to bolster people or to provoke people or entice people to tip me subliminally. Subliminal things that people don't necessarily realize. And one of those things, I'll go ahead and start. One of those things is the 4 quarters trick. Okay, it's called the 4 quarters trick. If you work at an establishment that has change, and a lot of people do. Now, I've worked at a place that didn't have change, and of course, this didn't work there because there was no change. But the 4 quarters trick is this. When someone goes to pay their bill, say somebody goes to pay their bill, I'm standing behind the bar. I'm the bartender. I'm always going to give you, say you bought a drink. It was $7 and you have $3 change coming back to you. It was $10. I'm going to give you back 2 singles and 4 quarters. And the reason is that people, like subliminally, they don't want to carry change. People don't want to carry change. So what they'll do, and also, this is the double whammy. Change does not register as dollar bills. Okay? Change does not register to the human brain as a dollar bill. So what you do is you give back 2 singles and 4 quarters. And what most people, it doesn't work every time, but it works a lot of the time. What most people will do is they will take those $2 bills, they'll slide them from underneath those quarters. They'll leave those 4 quarters right there and throw down another $1. Follow me? So that's one good way. That's one good way that actually has always worked for me. That's always worked for me. Another trick that I use is called the incredible pile of money. And I kind of coined that phrase myself. It's the incredible pile of money. Say I'm a bartender at a nightclub, I'm a bartender at a bar. And I got a large influx of people. There's a bunch of people coming. I got a couple dollars down on the bar. Don't pick them up. Put them right in front of your station. About 10 or 15 of them, singles, maybe a couple of 5s. Leave them right there, right where people can see them. And what happens is people see that pile of money, and subliminally, they add to it. When you give them back change, they'll take $1, maybe 2 sometimes, and they'll throw it right on top of that pile of money because it is a subliminal trigger. Okay? But you never want it to be too big. $10, $15 at the most. If it starts getting too big, take some of it, put it in your tip bucket. But the incredible pile of money has always worked. It always works for me, and so has the 4 quarters trick. Always works for me. Always works for me. Now, you can also do this. Now, I wouldn't really recommend this, although I do recommend it, because it gives you an opportunity to do the 4 quarters trick. And say you're giving back $20 worth of change. Give back a 10 and 2 5s. Okay? Now, that's a lot of people, that's awfully arrogant of you expecting to make 5. No. You can ask me for change. I'll get you change. Especially if it's over a particular amount. Just come back with a 10 and 2 5s. If they need change, they'll ask you for change. But a lot of people don't want to bother, especially if you're busy, and they'll throw you a 5 right down there. Now, if they ask you for change, can I get some change? Absolutely. You take one of the 5s, you give them back 4 singles and 4 quarters. And that right there is the other side of that trick. Okay, there's a lot of different ways to make your tips. Here's another good one. Learn some jokes. Simple. Really simple. Learn some jokes. A bunch of them. I worked with a bartender. He knew a bunch of jokes, like a bunch of just regular stock jokes. He wasn't a comedian. He just knew a bunch of bar jokes. He made a shit ton of cash every night because he had everybody laughing all night long. People would come and exchange jokes with him. I exchanged a couple jokes with him, to make my game stronger. There are things that you can do to make your game stronger. Me, I'm a magician. I'm a mixologist, but I'm also a magician. I was able to create some bar tricks to keep my guests entertained. Several different ones. I have about 7 or 8 stellar bar tricks that I can do throughout the course of the night to bolster or boost my tips when things get a little low. If time permits. Now, if I'm busy, of course, I can't do these things. But if I'm not busy, I can implement all of these things and I can make my money. I've gone and I've made money. I've made over $100 with 5 customers. I've made over $100 with 4 customers, with 3 customers, based on the service I was able to provide them, the information I was able to give them, and just straight hospitality, just being a good server, just paying attention to detail. That's what does it. That is the biggest trick of them all, is pay attention to the details. Pay attention to your guests. When a guest is disgruntled, and I mean, this is one thing I've learned. This is Management 101. When a guest is disgruntled, the only thing they really want is to be heard. Simple. The only thing that they want is to be heard. A lot of times, restaurant managers or servers or bar, they all screw it up by not listening or not giving the guest the opportunity to express what's really bothering them without being interrupted. You see, hospitality is a lot about humility. You have to humble yourself in order to serve people for a living. But you don't have to lose your dignity. Okay? You don't have to lose your dignity. You don't have to hoe yourself out for tips. And I'm not talking about strippers. Strippers know, and then now that's a class of people that really know the value of $1 and what it is to work and really hustle for their tips. But they also have a tremendous opportunity to make a lot of money. I've worked at plenty of strip clubs, and I've watched this happen in my face. I was a stripper once before myself, and I've watched it happen right down my pants. Tips. From pelvic gyration. People get tipped for all kinds of reasons, for nothing. I used to know a guy that used to come into a bar that I worked at in Fort Myers that a friend of mine owned. Shout out to Terry Tincher and Space 39, y'all. But there was a guy that used to come in there every now and then. He came in at least maybe once a week, maybe once every couple of weeks. But nobody knew his name, but everybody called him the $100 bill guy because every time he opened his mouth, he gave you $100. Every time you opened your mouth, he gave you $100. If you made him one drink and he paid with $100, you got to keep the change, and then he would tip you another $100. He'd do that all night. He would do that all night long. I mean, he'd make people's entire rent week. But things like that sometimes can be bad because you expect that. And when people don't put those numbers up for you, you become resentful. And it's just inevitable. So while it may be good from time to time, it helps a lot of people out of a lot of binds. Unless it's consistent, it can have negative effects. Like a guy that comes in to consistently see one particular person and he tips the shit out of this person but tips nobody else. Nobody else makes tips. I made $2,000 a night and everybody else made $85. That might, and if that happens on a regular basis, that could create some angst and animosity amongst employees. That's why a lot of people pool tips, which that can also be just super frustrating, especially when you have something that is, someone that is a beast. They're burning, and then you have somebody who doesn't, they don't know their asshole from their elbow. They're slow as Christmas. They don't contribute, and then you still have to split their your tips with this person. So there are a lot of discrepancies. There are a lot of discrepancies in the way that the tipping system works. For the most part, though, people seem to be okay with it. But I do know that Gen Zers, people from Generation Z, they tip a lot less than everyone else. A lot less. They're less likely to tip, more likely to stiff. Baby boomers tip the most. They'll tip you the most. Gen X, that's my generation, we also tip well because a lot of us were actually in the hospitality industry for a lot of our career, a lot of our lives. As a matter of fact, I still know some people that are still in the business. But yeah, we all, anybody in this business who works for tips, we all have to take into the consideration. We have to take this into consideration that no one owes us anything. They don't owe us, except for the person that we work for. They owe us the wage. But after that, no one owes us really anything. People tipping you is completely their discretion. How much they tip you is completely in their discretion. It all comes down to your ability. To your ability to provide good service with a smile on a consistent, ongoing basis. And it's that simple. If you do that and you apply all those principles, you're going to try some of the tricks I told you, and I guarantee you, you will be successful. You'll make more tips. You really will. You'll make more money. There are a lot of people out here who say they could never do it. I thought that at one time also. And I look at it like this. If you like people, you'll have fun. It's a good business. It can be a good business. But don't stay too long because you can be trapped. You can get stuck because a lot of them don't provide health insurance. I've even worked at places that don't even provide a paycheck. I used to get a check that says this is not a check because all my money was taken out. All the paycheck money was taken out in taxes. And I just got to keep my tip money. But luckily, this was the place where I would go home with $1,000 tonight. I mean, literally, I would go to work with no money and come home with rent for 3 weeks. I mean, rent for 3 months, literally. But those days are over for me. I'm old. I'm an aged bartender, so nobody really wants to hire an aged bartender. So here I am doing podcasts now. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, folks. If there's anything else that I think of, I will definitely do another podcast on this because, like I said, this is my business. I've been in this business for so long. I could tell you so many crazy stories about the shit that I've been through in this business. I actually served Frank Sinatra's cousin. He said, I'm a magician. I said, oh, yeah? I said, how? He said, because I'm going to turn this $20 into $120. Because he came in with a friend, and he had a couple of cups of coffee and a slice of cake or something like that. And he left me a $100 tip. Simple as that. It happens, folks. So I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Deron Harris Podcast for this week. Join me next week where we will be talking. I get ahead of myself sometimes. Where we'll be talking about God knows what. So I don't know. I might be talking about former President Trump and his legal woes. We might be talking about DeSantis and his bullshit down in Florida. Who knows, folks? But join me next week so you can find out, spin the wheel here at the home of the Deron Harris podcast. I'm going to continue trying to put out better content, try to look for some better subjects. Like I said, if you guys have anything that you guys want to talk about, feel free to drop some suggestions in the DM or email me at Deron, DERONT, as in Thomas, Harris, HARRIS, @gmail.com. You can also get me on YouTube as Deron Harris, Instagram as Deron Teray Harris Comedian, and Facebook as Deron T. Harris. And I also have a website you can go to, which is DeronHarris.com, if it's still up. I don't even know if it's still up. I rarely go to it. I should go to it. I really should go to my website, right? I should go to that. So I'm going to leave you guys alone for the day. I want to thank my wife and my mother and my father for being the best family. I want to thank my kids this time. I want to thank all my kids, all 4 of my children. I want to thank my dogs. By dogs, I mean my homie Jay for believing in me, my homie Gentry for giving me the platform to do my podcast on. I want to thank you guys every single week, and I'm going to thank you guys every single week for giving me this opportunity. I love it. I didn't think I could do it before, but here I am into my 2nd season, 10th episode. So here we go, spinning the wheel for the 2nd time in 2 years. So I think that's going to do it for me this week, folks. I love you all. Thank you for joining me for the Deron Harris podcast. And please, please, please join me again next week where I will be talking about God knows what. You've been listening to the Deron Harris podcast. I'm Deron Harris. See you next week. Peace.
You've been listening to the Deron Harris podcast. Subscribe to the show, give a good rating, and everything you need to know is at DeronHarris.com.